All right. Welcome back, everybody, for the final session of the 2021 conference. So last couple reminders here. If you want folks to watch this in the future or you want to rewatch any of these presentations, you can find it all on our YouTube channel. Reminder that the certificates of attendance, you cannot pull those up on your phone, only on a PC or a laptop. And it takes about an hour after the end of the presentation before those will show up. If you don't see them within an hour or two, go ahead and shoot me an email and let me know. Other than that, this is the last session. There's nothing else to sign up for. Thank you guys all for attending this year. So sitting here with me, we have Cody Main. I'm gonna have Cody get in the seat here and he'll introduce himself and we will get started.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Cody Main. I'm a firefighter paramedic with the city of Walla Walla, and we're going to be talking about dealing with some post-traumatic stress disorder. So first of all, I always start off a class with, excuse me, trying to learn the program here. How's this thing go? There we go. So, all right. So mental wellness is not Fight Club. We can talk about it. It's a long overdue conversation, something that we haven't talked about. And I think that it's time that we start having this conversation. So first of all, so this is me. This was me. Probably the last 10 years is kind of when this whole thing started. So we're gonna go over a little bit of an introduction here. So 2001, I was a student firefighter, resident with Pendleton Fire, and spent 2 years doing that, or 3, sorry. And then during the summers, I was a firefighter for the Oregon Department of Forestry out of Pendleton in the Eastern Oregon District. 2004 to 2005, I attended the Oregon Health Science University Paramedic Education Program. In the summer of 2005, I interned in Las Vegas. Had a brief stint in Winston Dillard Fire District. I don't know if any of you guys are out there listening. I know one is. So anyways, Winston's just south of Roseburg. And then in 2007, I got hired in Walla Walla, where I'm still currently employed. So one thing about all these agencies and programs I've been through, they never taught anything about mental health, nothing certainly about ourselves, let alone actually dealing with patients and mental health related crises. So little disclaimer here. So I'm not a therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, or psychologist, or any other type of mental health professional. I'm just someone sharing my hard-learned personal lessons when it comes to my own struggles and treatments. I'm selfish. Sharing and teaching is good for me. And like I said before, it's a far overdue conversation that we need to discuss. So I'm way better at having PTSD than I am at self-care. I'm new at this whole self-care thing. So I hope to become an expert in self-care that I need. I still have a lot of learning to do. And this information applies to everyone, regardless of your career or volunteer status, years of service, your rank, your department, gender. So some quick goals real quick: inspire a long overdue conversation regarding our mental, emotional, and behavioral health. Work to reduce stigma, and that's the stuff that kills us. Provide some hope, and encourage some help seeking. So Paul Combs, we all know his artwork. he tends to be pretty spot on as to how we have addressed issues in the past. So this is something that we've talked a little bit about, but far too many of us are killing ourselves every year. So more firefighters are killing themselves every year than dying in the line of duty. And we supposedly have the greatest job in the world, right? So obviously some things have to change. So start talking about myself a little bit. So I've traveled through madness to find me. And we'll get into my short story here. So I responded to a call October 2012. I can talk about it. I've talked about it lots. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the actual call though, because I don't want to trigger anybody and cause any vicarious trauma, because the experience that I had, it's not unique, and other people have certainly lived it. You know, there were nearly 200 people I saw sign on to here, so I want people to have an educational experience and not a traumatic experience. So what I will say, and this is kind of the sanitized version of it. So it involved a baby, and the situation was very similar to a deeply held fear that I had for my own child. So 5 months later, I had right shoulder surgery. For that 5 months, things seemed okay. You know, I remember going home that morning after that call and told my wife it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. And that was all I did to address it. So for 5 months, it was just another call. Just stayed in my routine. I went out in March for the shoulder surgery. I was out of work for 4 months. During that time, I became severely irritable. I had depression, some hypervigilance, started to have some risky behavior, nearly uncontrollable anger, rumination. And rumination is just sitting there and spinning on a thought, right? You can't figure it out, so you just keep thinking about it over and over and over and over and over again. Flashbacks, nightmares, lots of self-isolating, specifically at work, which is something that we all need to be paying attention to, not just at work with our coworkers, but also at home with our loved ones, friends, family, right? Because it's usually a precursor to suicide. And some increased alcohol consumption. I was also dealing with some chronic pain, just like the vast majority of us here. You know, we all have some arthritis, some knee pain, some back pain, all that kind of fun stuff. So come to find out, I was considered passively suicidal. And being passively suicidal means that you don't have a plan to actively kill yourself. You just don't care what happens to you, right? You might not mitigate all the different risk that you can. You know, you don't wear your seatbelt when you drive. You don't pay attention to your low air alarm on a fire, right? So there's all these different things that you can do that increases your chance of being hurt or killed. So, and I was ruminating on that call in the October 2012 call. So during this time, I started having some reckless thoughts. At one point, I thought, hey, I'd like to run from the cops. You know, I'm not that type of person, but for whatever reason, that seemed like a good idea. Nothing happened, but you know, you just start having these thoughts that are totally out of character for yourself. So at the same time, I'm feeling helpless, right? My shoulder's in a sling, or my arm's in a sling, immobilized for 6 weeks. I couldn't take care of my house. I had to have somebody come over and mow my lawn. I had to have, you know, other people help me with anything and everything around my house. I had a child at the time. He was an infant, and I couldn't even change my son's diaper. So I had to have the neighbor lady come across the street and help me do those type of things when my wife was at work. You know, so what kind of a man can't take care of his home or his child? At the same time, I was having some family issues with my father, and my grandfather passed away. So I went and I went to see my primary care provider, who prescribed me Prozac and Ativan. And for me personally, those drugs didn't do anything for me to help. So those were medications that didn't really do much for me at all. What helped a lot was he got me set up with a local therapist. So my therapist is one that uses CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and what it actually is later. So I started going once a week for 6 weeks, and then once every 2 weeks for 3 months, and once a month, and I'm still going. And this is pushing on 7 years now. There was a brief time for 9 to 12 months when I didn't go see him because I thought I was better. So 7 years of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's most certainly worthwhile, but I wasn't getting to the root. I wasn't getting to the root of the problem. And the thing I say is, if you knew me personally, you'd look at me and say, wow, the guy has a nice yard, you know, the yard being that he has a good career, he has a beautiful family, he's got a nice house and everything, and your life's nice and green and it's well manicured and everything. But I knew that I had this nasty weed that kept growing in my yard, and I would go see my therapist, and he would help me pick off basically just the top of it, and kept that weed from anybody else really seeing the weed, but I knew it was there. And it was getting to a point where I was probably going to have to poison that weed in order to get it out. So at that point, you know, you're talking, you know, does your addictions come up? Do marital problems come around? All kinds of all kinds of things. So I also started having some behavioral problems at work. I was triggered at work, and I made a comment out of frustration, and it was considered a veiled threat. I had a very passionate disagreement with my chief, and it was obvious that compassion fatigue and burnout had taken place. So April 16th, 2018 through May 25th, 2018, that's 40 days. And I did a 40-day stay at the International Association of Firefighters Center of Excellence, the specialized treatment facility in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. So I was number 277 out of more than 2,000 IFF members who've actually attended that Center of Excellence. And to this day, I don't know for sure if it was a beautifully horrible experience or a horribly beautiful experience, but that's the way I can describe it the best. It was a very difficult decision to leave my family for an unknown amount of time and fly all the way across the country, literally throw everything on my wife's plate and just go and take care of me. You know, I didn't have my phone. I couldn't talk to him. Couldn't text for the first 3 days. And then after that, we were able to make phone calls through a landline. Yeah, so that was a unique experience. So I spent 40 days there, and it was definitely worthwhile. They made some great progress. The way I say it is I was able to find a few pieces to my puzzle, and but my puzzle wasn't complete. So one night I was at work, and I started reading a book by a doctor in Texas, Cedar Park, Texas, named Tanya Glenn, and she's a therapist that deals specifically with police, fire, EMS, and military people. And she has a book called Code 4, Surviving and Thriving in Public Safety. And in that book, I saw a picture of Travis County, Texas, so the Austin area, one of their peer support team. And I looked at the photo, and there was a picture of a girl on this peer support team in Texas that I went to paramedic school with in Portland. And so I look her up on Facebook, and I said, why are you in this book? And she says, well, I'm on one of the teams that Dr. Glenn oversees down here in the Austin area. And I said, well, what do you think about her? And she says, man, she's the real deal. She's the shit. Like, if you got problems and you need to talk to somebody, she's the person to come see. So in May 2019, I made a trip to see Dr. Glenn in Cedar Park, Texas. There she does eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR treatment. It's kind of the hallmark standard treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And this was something that they didn't have in Maryland when I was there. So Dr. Glenn, she was awesome. So the bottom line was, I wasn't being the husband that my wife deserved, and I wasn't being the father that my son deserved. So it takes just one moment or one bad decision to mess up a marriage or a relationship with your child. We take our mentality everywhere. You know, those of us that are in EMS, we don't just check out and go home. You know, we take our skills and our knowledge with us everywhere we go. You know, you're always on duty, so to speak. Oops, hit the wrong button here. So with that, what I mean is we run the call. We run the call at home and we run the call at work. So, you know, your spouse coming to you and say, hey, did you pay that bill? Or your son saying, so-and-so called me a name at school or whatnot. You know, these are little calls that are brought to you at home. And we typically want to clear the call as quickly as possible and be ready for the next one. And that's something that we do at work. And that's what I was doing at home with my family. So this led to a lack of compassion that our families need and that they deserve. So that's the short story. Now we'll kind of get into building upon that. So far, my track record for getting through tough days is 100%. You know, any one of us that's listening to this, we've all had rough days. And if you're sitting here listening to this, you obviously made it through. So keep that in mind. And that's something that I found is a very powerful thing to talk about with patients who are dealing with these issues. You know, having patients in the back of our ambulance are saying, man, I want to kill myself. Well, how long have you been thinking about that? Oh, I've been thinking about that for years or months, weeks, days. Well, you know what? Every one of those little battles you won because you're here to tell me about it. So here's a little plug, right? So this is a shirt. KFG just means keep fucking going. And this is from Till Valhalla Project. You can look them up on the internet, and they're an organization that's focused on reducing veteran suicide. And this is one of their shirts they have. And it's one I bought. I wear it. They have another one. Just says, when the demons come, call on me, brother. We'll fight them together. So they got some cool stuff there. So here's some more Paul Combs. So we got the PTSD denier, right? We got the people that have it and don't believe it, and they don't want to believe it. And they fight it. It's not real. We have the other people, usually the older generation, and you know, have always come from the just suck it up type of culture, right? But you know, these are the things that get us: the substance abuse, the depression and anxiety, right? The social isolation. So we'll hit PTSD at a brief overview here real quick. So is PTSD new? It's not. So Civil War, it was known as soldier's heart. It was believed that they actually could feel arrhythmias in soldiers after combat. So World War I, shell shock. World War II is combat fatigue or battle necrosis. Vietnam is when it became post-traumatic stress disorder. But the Civil War, you know, 1860s, right? So what about if we take it all the way back to when Homer wrote the Iliad in the 6th century BC? So Achilles has signs and symptoms that would most likely lead to a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder based on the current criteria from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition. So there's been many mental health providers who've actually read that book and said that Achilles would be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So what is post-traumatic stress disorder? So it's chronic hyperactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight, versus the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest. That's all part of the autonomic nervous system. And it's controlled by the limbic system, consisting of your amygdala and your hippocampus. The amygdala, when you get diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, there's actually a manifestation where it increases in size and literally starts to take over your brain. So this is kind of the lizard brain. This is the antiquated part of our brain that kept us safe from saber-toothed tigers. So versus the hippocampus is our long-term memory, and it decreases in size. So people with post-traumatic stress disorder can actually start having memory problems. The amygdala, that's where the hyper activation of the sympathetic nervous system comes from. And it's brought on by traumatic event or events. So a chronic rumination of traumatic events or events. We'll talk about why that is here in a moment. So who gets it? Anyone can. So it doesn't discriminate. So PTSD normally occurs after a deeply held personal moral value or ethic is violated. Everyone has a unique measuring stick when it comes to trauma. And the best way I can explain this was one time I went to a session with my therapist, and he said, how's it going today? And I said, man, today's rough. He says, why is that? And I said, I didn't know that you could ruin a person's life by putting milk in the wrong colored cup. And of course, I was talking to my son about my son, and my therapist says, well, how old is your son? And I said, well, he's 3. He says, how old are you? I said, I'm 30. And he says, so you're 10 times older than your son? I said, yeah. He goes, think how many more life events and situations, and especially in your career, you have to measure what that cup represents to your son. It's a very, very big change. Your son hasn't seen and done the things that you've seen. So on his scale, that color cup is really important. On your scale, it's not. So trauma is the same way. When I responded to that call in October 2012, there were 5 of us there. And I was one of 5 that got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I was the only one. So that doesn't mean I'm weak or anything. That just means that I maybe had a different moral value or ethic that was violated. So your normal coping strategies are overwhelmed. And the severity of the trauma is not able to be processed by your brain. Therefore, it's not released to your hippocampus. So you're not able to figure out what happened to you. You have no idea. And instead of your brain saying, I got it figured out, and releasing it for your hippocampus to hold on to it and you to recall it when you want to, instead it stays in your prefrontal cortex, and you sit there and you just ruminate on it. You think about it, you spin on it, spin, and it literally starts to drive you crazy. So PTSD tends to be misunderstood. So a diagnosis can only be obtained from a qualified mental health professional based on the diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5. And PTSD is far more than something bad happened to me, and I feel bad about it. So in a nutshell, you lived through a horrible and tragic experience. You can't mentally process it, and your limbic system has hijacked your brain and put you in a survival mode. It is a way to protect yourself from other such experiences, and it's a maladaptive biological response to severe stress. So Dr. Glenn, this is this is her latest book. It just came out this week. I just finished it. And this is about building a peer support team. And in her book, she says, no one is immune to stress, and public safety professionals are not robots. These professionals have hearts and minds, and they all have limits. So congratulations, you've been diagnosed with PTSD. So now what? First of all, it's not a life sentence. It doesn't mean that you're crazy or weak. It means that you had a very normal human or biological response to an extraordinarily horrible, threatening, scary, and or stressful situation. It's nothing to be ashamed of. My therapist told me that the fact that I had the reaction to what I witnessed means that I'm human, right? And if I hadn't felt the way that I felt, or it didn't affect me in a negative way, he said that that's usually the sign of a sociopath. So allowing yourself to feel things and not being afraid of how you feel about something is something that we all need to get better with. So when I was diagnosed with PTSD, it was like the mental health professional told me that I was broken. Me, my whole being, my brain and my soul. I heard the therapist say that I was crazy, weak, pathetic, and a failure, when in actuality, he said none of that at all. It was the stigma that said it all. And this is the shit, like I said, that kills us. You know, we're afraid to reach out for help for a whole host of different reasons, right? So I was certain that my life, as I knew it, was over, and I was broken, I couldn't be fixed. So little did I know, I could have a story of recovery, redemption, rebirth, and forgiveness. So when you get a diagnosis, you have a choice to make. And it's which way are you going to go? You hit that fork in the road, right? Are you going to go to the left? You going to go to the right? You going to go easy or hard? Going to drive or walk? Going to go downhill or uphill? And it's literally life or death. So to me, when I look at that photo, the path to the left, that's the one that you've been on. That's the easy way to go. That's the addiction. That's the extracurricular activities that you're into that are maybe questionable morally or ethically, right? That's your bad habits. That's your bad friendships. That's your life without creating new boundaries or trying new things, right? Going to the right's obviously going to be a little bit more arduous, right? It's going to be a little harder. Not many people have gone up that way. So let's make this real. So Captain Dustin Samples from Cleveland, Tennessee. This picture was taken very recently. His youngest daughter there is she's not even a year old. Dustin was my roommate in Maryland at the Center of Excellence. And December 11th of last year, 2 weeks before Christmas, Dustin killed himself. He went out behind his house and shot himself on his patio when his family was home. And yeah, it was the first time I've talked about this one, so a little difficult. His jacket there, myself, I traveled to Tennessee for a service. There was 6 other people I was at the Center of Excellence with Dustin, and we got to go to a station where he was, in Tennessee, they call them halls. So we went to 5 Hall, they call it, which was his house. And we were able to pick up his turnouts and bring him to the church and set him up. And, you know, I carried that turnout jacket and put it there on that table. And that's something I never thought I'd do. And yeah, the last few times I've taught a class similar to this, it's just been pictures of people, of firefighters that I've read stories about. I never personally knew them. So it's a tough deal. But we'll go to this though. Here's a new term, flossom, right? It's an individual who embraces their flaws and knows they're regardless, awesome regardless. So if you think about it, we're all pretty flossom. So we have to build our resiliency. So what is resiliency? It's the capability of a strained body to recover its size and shape after deformation caused especially by compressive stress, or the ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So building resilience, how do we do it? First of all, we got to learn how to develop positive coping skills, understand available treatments, strive for post-traumatic growth, limit exposure to trauma, and implement healthy self-care plans. So one of the things that I have to do on that list, limit exposure to trauma. You know, we all want to sit around and share war stories and whatnot, and sometimes I'm not in the mood to listen to it, so I have to excuse myself from that. I have a friend that I grew up with who killed himself when we were in high school. He hung himself, and to this day, 20 years later, if we're watching a movie or something and they're gonna hang somebody or whatnot, I gotta leave. I have to know those traumas or those triggers and limit my exposure to things. So we have to develop healthy boundaries, and that's with people, right? Typically, we have to learn how to say no, learn to recognize emotions. We got to have realistic goals, share your experiences, understand your triggers, and have positive human relationships. So where do we start? Start somewhere small, somewhere familiar, and with something doable. So we'll watch a little video here.
Every morning in SEAL training, my instructors, who at the time were all Vietnam veterans, would show up in my barracks room, and the first thing they'd do was inspect my bed. If you did it right, the corners would be square, the covers would be pulled tight, the pillow centered just under the headboard, and the extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the rack. It was a simple task, mundane at best, but every morning we were required to make our bed to perfection. It seemed a little ridiculous at the time, particularly in light of the fact that we were aspiring to be real warriors, tough, battle-hardened SEALs. But the wisdom of this simple act has been proven to me many times over. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task, and another, and another. And by the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that the little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. And if by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that is made, that you made. And a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better. So if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed.
So to me, Admiral McRaven, he illustrates, and he's got a book on this. I haven't read it yet. I think it's called Make Your Bed. But he points out starting somewhere small, somewhere familiar, and with something doable. I know when I was a teenager, making my bed was really hard. But I think I've gotten a little bit better at that, being how many times I've had to make it in my career. So let's see. How do we get past this one? There we go. All right. So self-care. Keep calm and practice self-care. So it's taking time to meet one's own physical and psychological needs, not comparing your story to anyone else's. Your story is unique, and your stresses are unique to you, and the way that you process those, you shouldn't compare it to anybody else. Some examples of self-care: getting good rest, sleeping well. So making sure that you're eating, you're nourishing yourself, staying hydrated, saying no, right? Setting that boundary. Laugh. I think laughing's one of the best medicines, as they say. I know a guy in Walla Walla where I live. That's one of his big deals. He's a speaker and does a bunch of emceeing stuff, and he talks about happy work environments and how laughing is a good thing. So keep that in mind. So listening to music, I got a playlist on my phone that it just says PTSD sucks. And when I listen to those songs that I put in that playlist, they're like 3 to 5 minute therapy sessions for me. It's somebody else in a more artistic way expressing to me how I felt a lot about things. So music's a big deal for me. Reading and writing. So making sure you're doing something fun. And sometimes doing nothing is still doing something. We all have to have those days where we do nothing, right? Those days where we don't have anything planned. But you got to keep in mind, doing nothing more days than doing something, that's called depression. So good place to start out is with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he talks about the bottom of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is where we need to be, right? When we're stressed out, when we've gone through a traumatic situation, we have to meet those basic physical needs of air, water, food, rest, health, right? I mean, think about the meal train stuff now. You have somebody who suffers a death in their family. I know one of the biggest things that I've heard people talk about that was great was the fact that they didn't have to worry about cooking food. I mean, these people might have a hard time even having the energy to brush their teeth, let alone make themselves a healthy meal. So if you can meet people at a basic level, including yourself, you're at a really good advantage. So one of the things that Dr. Glenn talks about in her books and crisis level or dealing with difficult people is just the mere act of handing somebody that's in a crisis a bottle of water. It shows that you care about them, that you're willing to take care of them, that they're in a safe environment. It's a very powerful thing, just handing somebody a bottle of water. So make sure that you're thinking about that for yourself. So address the basic human needs. So positive coping skills, just some ideas. Not that I do all of those. I'm not much of a crafter. So, but these are some that I thought about with guys that I work with, friends that I have, right? But the big deal is none of these say drinking or using drugs, right? So when relying on your coping skills to get you through a difficult time, sobriety is very important. So the vast majority of firefighters and police officers who actually complete suicide, when they do an alcohol test on them, postmortem or a drug test, they're all found to be, not all, but a high level of them, like 85, 86% of them are found to be intoxicated. So making sure that you are sober when dealing with difficulty in your life is very important. I know my friend Dustin, he struggled with alcohol, and you have that one, you have that inhibition, that thought, and then you put a substance on top of it that lowers that threshold even more, and then all of a sudden you complete the thought that you've had for a long time. So sobriety is important. Also, taking care of the little stresses as they arise, right? We got to have room in our life in order to take care of the big things, right? And something that I like, something I heard one of our guys at work say, 1,000 pounds of feathers is still 1,000 pounds, right? And this came from us sitting around the fire station one day bitching about the little things. And one of the old guys said, well, it's just a little thing. And one of our guys, one of the younger guys says, well, 1,000 pounds of feather is still 1,000 pounds. So something that's stuck with me. So we're going to talk about some treatments here real quick. These are examples of treatments. I haven't had all these. We talked a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy. We'll hit that again. EMDR, exposure therapies, something that people will typically do if say they were in a car accident and they have a fear of getting in a car or driving or visiting the place of a trauma. You know, they put them back in those type of environments. Inpatient and rehab was Maryland, also medications and groups. So you can finish this saying for me here. So what doesn't kill me, we would typically say makes me stronger, right? I think this is more appropriate. What doesn't kill you gives you a set of unhealthy coping mechanisms and a dark sense of humor. So that tends to be more on par with myself and the vast majority of people I know that are in public safety. So choosing to go to treatment is hard. It's it's an act of bravery, and it's scary. And this is regardless of just going to therapy at a local therapist office for the first time or attending an inpatient program. I mean, the first time I went to see my therapist in Walla Walla, that was difficult, let alone fly all the way across the country. So, but we can look at people such as Kyle Carpenter. I'm gonna give you a minute and see if you guys can think about who Kyle Carpenter is. So this is Kyle Carpenter. So Kyle Carpenter's a Marine who's won the Medal of Honor. He was in Afghanistan as a machine gunner, and he was on a observation post in a little village with a fellow Marine, and a grenade was thrown up on the roof where they were, and he jumped on the grenade and shielded it from his friend, and the grenade blew up underneath him. His right eye is prosthetic. The whole side of his right face is titanium. His right arm is obviously burnt, and he had close to 30 surgeries done on that arm. And Kyle wrote this book, You're Worth It. And in the book, he says, sometimes you make decisions on behalf of future you. You know that present you is probably going to have to deal with a little bit more discomfort or inconvenience right now. But long term, you will be grateful for the choices that you made today. You don't merely, you don't want merely to hope for better days ahead. You want to take the steps necessary to ensure them. Stay motivated. So if you're into those type of books and want to read a great story, man, Kyle Carpenter, he's a good one to go with. So observation that I made was choosing to go to treatment must be for you and nobody else. There was a lot of guys that I was in treatment with who they were there on some sort of an ultimatum, whether that was from their place of employment or their spouse or whatnot. And those type of people, they tend to not think that they have a problem, but yet here they are in rehab, or here they are in a treatment center for people with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So they tend to be pretty obstinate and not really take advantage of it. So that brings up a good point. So we're not going to talk much about addiction here. I can do that in a different class, but because that wasn't something I dealt with. But one thing I did learn in treatment was, what do you think? I want you to think about this. What do you think addiction is? Right? What does it mean to be addicted to something? So some people will say, well, I don't have a problem because I've never got arrested, or I don't have a problem because I've never got a DUI, or I've never been to jail. And they usually tie some sort of a legal aspect to addiction, right? And what the therapist taught us in Maryland was a really simple definition. And an addiction, whether it's a substance, whether it's an activity or whatever, it's choosing that specific substance or activity or what have you over meaningful relationships, right? So not going to talk much about it, but might be something for you to ponder on your own, because lots of us, we probably have some sort of an addiction that we don't necessarily think of. So if you're choosing something over meaningful relationships, it might be something for you to think about. Also, so if we take care of ourselves, who benefits? So everybody benefits, right? I benefit, you benefit, my family benefited, my friends, my coworkers, my patients. You know, the patients I've had since being back from Maryland, I feel were better taken care of. They got more compassion, everything than before I went to Maryland, right? The public in general benefits. And I truly believe that happy, healthy, and we're talking mentally and emotionally, behaviorally here, happy firefighter, paramedics, EMTs, they want to be at work, right? So everybody benefits if you take care of yourself. So Dr. Glenn, before I flew to Texas, she says, I don't want to see you down here until you go to your primary health provider and you have some labs done. You got to get your hormones. We'll talk about those in these labs. So hormones, they're not checked on a routine metabolic panel. So when your doctor says, hey, we're going to do a metabolic panel and we're going to get your cholesterol and your creatine and your all your blood stuff, these hormones are not checked. You have to ask for them. So hormones play a vitally important role in our mental, emotional, and behavioral health. Like I said, you gotta usually prompt them to order them. And the big one that she was wanting me to have checked was my testosterone, cortisol, which is your stress hormone, right? Thyroid, and vitamin D. Well, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, your vitamin D is going to be low, right? So thing about vitamin D, it's not usually covered by insurance unless you have some sort of pre-existing condition that will typically affect that. So for me, my out-of-pocket cost on that test for my vitamin D was $100. But if you're hormonally messed up and you try to go to therapy and everything, it's like trying to climb up a icy road with bald tires and no traction devices, and you're just going to sit there and spin and spin and spin. So you got to get your hormones under check here in order to make good on your treatment, right? So ladies, a big one for you is the postpartum depression, the progesterone and the estradiol. So, and they told us in Maryland as well that men can actually have postpartum depression, and it's usually not hormonally driven, right? It's actually driven by a lack of identity. Now you have this responsibility, and you can't just say, well, I'm going to go play around a golf, right? So you have this shift in your life where your free time is no longer really yours anymore. So I thought that was an interesting point that they brought up. So talk with your primary health provider about your hormonal health and how it can affect your overall health, and possibly a referral to an endocrinologist. So I don't know for sure if Sigmund Freud said this, but I like to think that he did, so I included it. Before you diagnose yourself with depression or low self-esteem, make sure you're not in fact surrounded by assholes. So I thought we needed a nice little fun one there. All right. So we'll get into some cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It's normally referred to as talk therapy, psychotherapy, and that's really what Sigmund Freud kind of pioneered. So it's where you work with your mental health counselor, your psychotherapist or therapist in a structured way, and attending a limited number of sessions. Going and talking to a therapist isn't one and done. So keep that in mind. So cognitive behavioral therapy helps you become aware of inaccurate or negative thinking so you can view challenging situations more clearly and respond to them in a more effective way. It's a long process. Like I said, I've been seeing my therapist for 7 years, and I actually look forward to every session that I have with him. So it's hard work. So think of the therapist as a farmer in the sense that they plant seeds, and it's up to you to kind of water and nurture it and reap the benefits of it. So they help you with reframing. And reframing is taking a negative thought and thinking about it in a different way that is then useful for yourself. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is what I went to Texas to see Dr. Glenn for. So EMDR is a psychotherapy that enables people to heal from the symptoms and emotional distress that are a result of disturbing life experiences. It's simulating rapid eye movement of REM sleep in a conscious state. So at night, tonight when you go to bed, you're going to take, and all the experiences you've had today are in your mind, right? And you go to bed, and as you're sleeping, when you enter REM sleep, your brain's going to start going through all those files from today, and it's going to say, this one was important, I'm going to keep this one, I'm going to put it over here, and my hippocampus, this one, yeah, I don't really need this one isn't important, right? So what happens with trauma is you can't figure it out, right? That moral ethic or value was violated to the point that you simply can't figure it out. So it stays in your REM sleep, in your prefrontal cortex. And actually at night, after a trauma, you studies show that you really don't get good sleep, and your whole cognitive side of your brain, your whole rational thought process side of your brain typically shuts down after trauma. And it takes anywhere from like 48 to 72 hours for your brain to literally come back online, if you will. And it's much like if you can imagine like a big empty warehouse that's dark, and you start flipping the panels on, the lights on, and they come on in banks, and they start out real dim and they get brighter over time. That's kind of how your brain comes back around after trauma. So you do this EMDR where they simulate rapid eye movement, and you go through this therapy, this guided therapy, and the therapist starts connecting these dots. And I remember showing up, and Dr. Glenn, she says, everything that you need is in your brain. We just got to find it and connect them. And tell you what, it was a crazy experience, but well worth it. So inpatient programs. So I put these three up there. These are three that I know people that have gone through. Deer Hollow is down in the Salt Lake City area. It's a small center down there. I heard really good things about there. There's a therapist there named Matt Quackenbush. He has some podcasts, and he says that the cure for pain is pain. So he refers to his office as the pain box. And I hear he's a phenomenal person. I've heard him speak at a conference, and he was really, really good. Of course, you have the IFF Center of Excellence with Advanced Recovery Systems, and Warrior's Heart. Warrior's Heart's down in Texas, and they started dealing mostly with veterans, and they've gotten into public safety people there. And one of the cool things they do is they have a big wood shop at Warrior's Heart, and you can go online and you can buy thin red flag, wooden flags, and thin blue line stuff and everything. And that's all part of their treatment there, because people with trauma, they need to be exposed to different types of hobbies and things that they can do, that they might enjoy. And they found woodworking is a really important, a really good way to do that with men in general. And they take and they sell these online to help fund their program. So if your department or you are in the market for something like that, Warriors Heart's a great place to go look for stuff and help a good cause. Let's see what else. Warriors Heart also brings up the point where there was this psychologist I was talking to, and he talked about the difference between men and women and how we address trauma. Women tend to relate to another woman in what they call face to face. So usually it's talking, right? Usually they have a nice long visit, right? Men tend to relate shoulder to shoulder. We don't typically sit and just talk, right? We want to be doing something. So men talk, you know, they might say, let's go fishing, or let's go to the gym, or let's go, I'll go help you cut wood or re-roof your house or whatnot. And that's typically how men relate to each other. So I just recently read that and thought that was pretty cool. So medications, you got to remember they're a tool. They don't fix the problem themselves. So beta blockers are a drug that they're using in treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. Like I'm on propanolol, we call them propies. Propies are awesome. So what they found with beta blockers is, so I was going to my primary care physician because I had high blood pressure. This is honest to God how it went. And my blood pressure, it wasn't crazy high, but it was high for a guy my age. So they started me on hydrochlorothiazide, and my blood pressure didn't do anything. I just had to pee a lot, right? So anyways, it didn't help anything. So I said to him, hey, this doesn't work. I'm just peeing. And he says, all right, so let's give you some lisinopril. So he put me on lisinopril, and it didn't do anything, just made me cough. So, you know, it came down to diet and exercise, which, okay, yeah, that's cool. That's all valid and everything. I go to Maryland, and they said, well, your blood pressure's high. I said, yeah, I know. And so they've given me hydrochlorothiazide. They've given me lisinopril for it. And they said, well, we're going to give you propanolol. And they said, one of the reasons that those drugs haven't worked for you is because you don't really have high blood pressure because you have high blood pressure. You have high blood pressure because you have an anxiety disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is the mother of all anxiety disorders. So they said, really, no matter how you medicate this blood pressure problem, it's not going to fix it, versus if we give you something that actually helps break the sympathetic response that your body's just chronically in, right? Then we can lower your blood pressure. So yeah, they gave me some propanolol, and propanolol is awesome. It's a drug that's been really helpful for me. So if you're finding yourself in a similar situation, that might be a conversation to have with your primary health provider. So of course, antidepressants. So bioavailability. So bioavailability is meaning that some people, like certain supplements, you have to take this supplement to make that supplement work, right? So researching things, just not blindly taking medications like we Americans tend to just say, I don't want to have whatever, just give me a pill for it. And then you take the pill and it magically goes away. That's not how it works. And that's what our patients think. That's not how it works. The other thing is genetic testing for drug compatibility. They can literally take just a swab, and they do the genetic test, and it'll say that, well, you're not compatible with these types of drugs. So your physician will get that, and they'll just know that these types of drugs aren't even worth trying. So, which is really cool because it cuts down on the smorgasbord of pharmaceuticals that we tend to go through. And when you're in a situation with your mental health and you're thinking that nothing's working for you and you're taking this medication, every medication that they prescribe to you, you hope it's going to be the medication, and then you're let down because it's not, right? So you can just have this genetic test done, and it will cut out a lot of that type of basically it'll cut down on the time, and you'll just get right to what you need. So that's another useful tool. So if you're using medication for a mental health condition, make sure you go to therapy. I mean, that's the main medicine for me is my therapist. So they could take all the other medication away, but if I'm able to go to therapy, I know that's the most important thing for me. So, and anybody that's treating you, giving you these types of drugs, they should have some training with the diagnostical statistical manual of mental health disorders. You know, this isn't one of those things where your primary health provider should be working with you. You should be working with a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, going through these type of things. So group therapy. Group therapy is a form of psychotherapy that utilizes personal interaction with people who have shared experiences to help individuals process, cope, and grow. So it's helping individuals identify maladaptive behavior and providing help with emotional difficulties through positive feedback. So that's what the Center of Excellence is built upon. It's a place for firefighters to go. You live in things called station houses. There's patch boards, there's artwork, there's bells around and everything. So it's really a familiar group, familiar setting with people who have shared experiences, right? So it's offering individuals a supportive environment of peers with similar life experiences. So reducing feelings of loneliness and alienation by bringing together individuals with shared experience and emotional patterns. So the thing about treatment is you got to be tenacious and you got to be relentless. You have to be willing to go, willing to pursue whatever type of treatment you think will help you. Be willing to go wherever you think you need to go, whether that's Maryland or Texas or wherever. Be willing to do the work. Got to be open to criticism. People will say, I went to a therapist and I quit going to a therapist because I didn't like what they said. Well, guess what? You're seeing a therapist because you obviously have a problem. And it's the therapist's job to be a critic of you. That's how you get better. Be honest and vulnerable with yourself, friends, families, and those treating you. Be willing to keep learning. And be willing to share your successes. So, and here's that book, Code 4, Surviving and Thriving in Public Safety by Dr. Glenn. All right. So now we'll hit post-traumatic growth, right? There's nothing stronger than a broken man who's rebuilt himself. So post-traumatic growth, right? It used to be what's wrong with me is now what happened to me. That's kind of a reframing type thing that they do in therapy there, right? Experience of individuals whose development, at least in some areas, has surpassed what was present before the trauma, right? So you're better now than you were before. So David Brooks wrote a book called The Second Mountain, and The Second Mountain's a really cool book because he had a book prior to that called The Road to Character. And in The Road to Character, he made some pretty big claims and everything, and it was a #1 New York Times bestseller and everything. And after he wrote that book, he had a divorce, and what he thought was right actually turned out to be wrong. So David Brooks spends the first part of the book writing about how his prior book was actually wrong about everything. So he's a pretty humble guy. I like him. Anyway, so your first mountain is usually defined by title or ego, right? I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a paramedic. I want to be an astronaut, an attorney, a doctor, you know, whatever. It's usually defined by something that people can look up to you as, right? And your storm comes in, your trauma, your life experience or whatnot, and it blows you off your first mountain, and you land down in the valley or the wilderness, as he calls it, and you're going through trying to figure life out, and then you start climbing your second mountain. And your second mountain is usually defined by purpose, passion, or love. Right? So in the book, these are 2 long paragraphs, but I think David was writing this about me when he wrote this book. That's what I like to think. And it says, in the leanness of the wilderness, life prepares you for the intimacy with yourself. Sometimes that surfaces the pain. There are red hot memories of past failures and past grief. There are all the wounds inflicted by parents and grandparents. There are all, lost my spot. There are your own bad actions that flow from these wounds, your tendency to lash out, your tendency to be hyper afraid of abandonment, your tendency to be incommunicative, and to withdraw at the first sign of stress. Your pain is deep and it won't just go away. It is also uniquely yours because it is linked to some of your earliest life experiences. Your call is to bring that pain home. As long as your wounded parts remain foreign to your adult self, your pain will injure you as well as others. As the saying goes, suffering that's not transformed is transmitted. So post-traumatic growth usually happens when it's least expected. Mine happened at work after all this trips to Texas and Maryland and everything. I was standing in the back of our station with my bow. I took my bow to work and I was shooting my block and I was reciting Bible verses to myself for this men's group I was in. And that's kind of where, you'll see it, it'll come up here in a minute in a photo, but the big moment of my post-traumatic growth happened in a moment that I had no idea it was coming. So how do you expect others to love you and respect you if you don't love or respect yourself? So this is the biggest part of my post-traumatic growth right here, right? This is my watch. Give yourself grace, love, and respect. Be proud of your battle. You fought bravely. Enjoy being better. Hashtag suck at PTSD, right? So we'll go back here. So which way did you go? Did you go left or did you go right? And being that this is the Eastern Oregon EMS conference, I'm pretty sure this next photo, somebody's gonna know, but so rough roads and beautiful views. So what town is this? There's probably somebody sitting there watching this right now. Anybody answer anything?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. All right. It's Halfway, Oregon. Population 288. Right. This is the Main Street view. This is the view that anybody that drives to Halfway can look up and see the mountains there. Right. It's easy. It's beautiful. Right. And if it's pretty from here, just imagine what it looks like up in the mountains. Right. So travel up if you go up the roughest, toughest, dirtiest, steepest, rockiest, shittiest roads, they often lead to the most beautiful views. So this is Twin Lakes up in those mountains that we just looked at. So you got to keep going, keep moving forward, one step at a time, one day at a time. Another way to view it or look at this is also through the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is known as golden joinery. It's the Japanese art of repairing broken ceramics by mixing precious metals into glue and mending the broken pieces back together in a more unique and beautiful way. And it still serves the same purpose as it was originally intended, right? So Dr. Morris from the Center of Excellence, she has a YouTube video where she explains this in pretty great detail, where she says, in Western culture, if we broke one of those bowls, we would throw it away, right? Because it can't be fixed. The Japanese, they take it and they figure that they can fix it so it can also serve its original purpose, but somebody can tell that it's been broken and that it's been mended. So it's pretty cool. So Matt Armstrong's an artist and he drew this, with a brain and some kintsugi, and that's just, I'm not a big artsy fartsy guy, but I like that a lot. Let's see. So after all this therapy, treatment, medications, reading, writing, talking, listening, what have I learned about me? So I have learned none of this was my fault. I'm a 37-year-old man with daddy issues. I was emotionally and verbally abused as a child by my biological father. Anger is my default emotion, right? And think about this. So anger, right? Anger is a primary emotion. We can all have anger. We all do, right? And there's nothing wrong with anger, right? This is another bit that the therapist in Maryland told us. The part with anger that gets us in trouble is the aggression that's associated with it, right? So somebody can piss you off and you can be super angry about it and you can still remain calm. But it's the aggression that we tend to show, right, when we're angry that gets us in trouble. That's the stuff that leads to the behavioral problems. That's the stuff that leads to the shouting and something being thrown in our house that our neighbor hears and calls 911. And then next thing you know, the cops are there and there's a domestic violence charge and everything. When nobody was hit or anything like that, none of that's going to be good for any of us, right? So being angry is okay. It's controlling your aggression. That's the trick. So I put an extraordinary value on friendships. That means I tend to celebrate with my friends, and I also tend to suffer with them a lot more than what's healthy. So I need a spiritual relationship. I need to give myself grace, love, and respect. Dudes can do yoga. So they made us do yoga in Maryland, and guess what, guys? I know you can do it. One guy, I remember one guy saying, I just pulled my fat, but you know what? He did it. I also saw guys that said I'm not flexible enough, so they had them doing what they called chair yoga. So, all right. So meditation is cool and it works. I've come to learn that massages are important. I must take care of myself first. Therapy is vital for me. Writing is a powerful tool for me. Reading is important. It's okay to take care of myself. I can say no. I've gone through this for a reason, and my wife's awesome. So she definitely was a warrior, a warrior going through all that with me. And last night she was helping me proof all these slides and everything, and you know, she said that it was really interesting going through this with me and looking back at it in hindsight. And she was really surprised that I was able to hide as much as I was for as long as I was. You know, and she felt bad that she wasn't able to see that and to help me get through that in a different way, you know. So it really goes to speak as to how good we are at hiding our hurt. Right? And the last thing I learned is men who are doing inner healing work is the new sexy. So vulnerability, chicks dig it. I've come to find out. So emotions are important. Allowing yourself to feel adds value to experiences. You know, I remember sitting there during Christmas this year watching my son open a gift, and I thought to myself, I'm feeling something. What am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling joy. And it was really kind of interesting because I have a completely different memory now of that experience with my son opening a Christmas gift, just because I was able to stop for a second and say, wow, I'm feeling joy here. So if you're into reading, there's another book I can recommend. It's Mark Brackett, Permission to Feel. And he talks about how we have made we've really done a disservice to our children by stifling them. And we typically stifle somebody emotionally because them being emotional makes us uncomfortable, right? If somebody's crying around us or somebody's being emotional, it's for a reason, but it's making us uncomfortable. So we try to stop it, right? We try to get somebody from crying, or we try to keep somebody from screaming or whatnot. And actually, if you let people have their emotional response, it's better for that person to go all the way through that, you know, to the point where I'm sure we've all heard somebody, you know, when they get to the point where they've cried so long and hard that they actually run out of breath and they, right? So that's usually somebody completing an emotional cycle. And if you allow people to complete those emotional cycles, those people are gonna deal with that situation that elicited that response in a healthier way. So 5 years ago, I was a fucking mess. I'm still a fucking mess, but I'm at peace with it. And I found a bunch of great music and some really cool tattoo ideas. So an important thing to do is find yourself a battle buddy or two. This gentleman raised the cone. He was my first battle buddy. He was a veteran of the Vietnam War. He was at the Battle of Hill 875 in Dak Tao, and at that battle, it had the worst friendly fire incident of the whole Vietnam War happen at that battle. There was a Marine aircraft that dropped a bomb on top of the hill that these gentlemen were fighting on, and it landed right in the middle of the casualty collection point. And Ray, he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, and he was the first person that ever told me that he had PTSD. And so he was my first battle buddy. And you know, he recently passed away, but this quote from General Patton really hits home with it. You know, it's foolish and wrong to mourn the men who've died. Rather, we should thank God that such men have lived. So, but Ray also said, and this is on my watch as well, it's okay to look back at your past, but don't stare. So we're getting close to closing up here. I'm not the person, I'm still not where I want to be as a person, and I'm not sure where or if there is an endpoint for that, but I'm a little better today than I was yesterday, and I hope to be a little bit better tomorrow than I am today. So that's kind of my goal every day. So I promise you can change your department's or agency's culture. This is I don't even remember how this picture happened, but I'll just call it a Walla Walla Fire Department peer support meeting. And if you actually look, it says Walla Walla, or it says peer support team policy manual there. So anyways, it's a little levity here, right? So we'll go back to this guy. This is still me, but now I'm okay with it. I might be a little bit more graceful now, but so thoughts of suicide. Here's some, you know, for yourself or family, friend, coworker. Here's some numbers real quick. It's always good to have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in your phone. Code 4 Northwest is a nonprofit out of Seattle, started by some retired Seattle police officers. They're a pretty big organization. They do a lot of stuff in the Pacific Northwest. Safe Called Now is through Seattle Fire's local IFF 27. These are all anonymous. And then also the National Volunteer Fire Council Share the Load. So it's important to have this information around because, as Paul Combs says, it's not always this obvious, right? So we got to do a good job of reaching out for help when we need it and also inspiring other people to reach out. So it's okay to not be okay. Asking for help is a strength and not a weakness. That's all I got. Any questions? We'll do some questions here and I'll leave this up. This is my contact information if anybody's interested in anything more.
Okay, we're watching to see if any questions pop up.
Not seeing anything yet. So.
Thank you.
Yes, and I have any questions yet for Cody. I would just, I think we thank Cody, and I think he said at the beginning was, we have a brave job. Firefighters are seen as brave, but I think it's much braver to take this on and, and identify this in yourself and to reach out and help others for sure. And probably, maybe I'm wrong, but it shouldn't have to be this brave. I think that's what Cody was getting. It should be easy for us to ask for help, and I know it's not. In addition to those resources, being the chief level I am, most every insurance plan as well, and your HR, there's employee assistance plans that will help you get, initial start as well as these others. So, there's lots of resources to make sure we make that available to our coworkers.
Very good.
Someone had a good question. If you notice a partner or a coworker who has PTSD, what are some ways you can help them?
So I think one of the big things is getting educated in really what post-traumatic stress disorder is, or what any type of mental health issue that's prevalent within fire, EMS, public safety in general, really. Researching those. One thing that we've done in Walla Walla is our medical director wants everybody that practices under his license to be trained in mental health first aid. And mental health first aid, it's an 8-hour curriculum. There's usually lots of grant programs that hospitals are giving. So that's one thing that we're doing. It teaches signs of different mental health issues. We've created within my department crisis packets that are on the back of every bedroom door in our stations that have all of our peer support guys in it, our insurance information. It has AA meetings, NA meeting schedules in it, and accompanying that is a checklist of signs and symptoms. So if somebody does notice something, they're like, I don't know if that's like maybe something I should be concerned about, they can go to literally any bedroom in our fire stations and they can find a checklist there. So, but I think educating is a big deal. And then another deal with the education is we tend, and I'm not talking specific in our career, just people in general, I think they don't ask somebody if they're thinking about hurting themselves or killing themselves, especially a friend or family member, because they don't know what to do if the person says yes. So learning what those local resources are is really important. So that'd be something. But the person that you might be thinking about, though, is this a big departure from how I've known this person, their whole career or over the last 5 years or whatnot. So that's usually a really good place to start, is how have they changed over a certain amount of time.
And then do you think with EMS and fire, is PTSD usually an isolated event, or is it more of a cumulative and something just puts you over to where you're no longer coping well?
I think it can really be both. I think that usually, I know when I came out of medical school, I was that guy that thought I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof and was going to save the world, but this career, it'll chew you up, spit you out emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, so I think it can be either one. I think the cumulative stress is most certainly an important thing to think about. It's easier, I think, to combat cumulative stress because we can instill, good coping skills, healthy relationships and stuff that might help us adjust to the accumulative stress more versus just that one big one that comes rolling down the hill and runs us over like a freight train. So it can really be both, but I think that the accumulative stress can be more easily managed than the big incident.
Yesterday, Dr. Buckles talked a little bit about kids and PTSD and talked about the ACE study, which is adverse childhood events. And the movement really of trauma-informed care has come out of that ACE study. When you went to your counseling and some of what I saw in your presentation, how much did they take you all the way back to your own childhood? And so not just looking at your fire career, but going back to growing up?
Yeah, so one of the things they did in Maryland, they'd take you into a room, and it was a decent sized room, and it had a whiteboard that was literally floor to ceiling, and then about, I don't know, probably 30 feet long. And my friend Dustin, who I referenced in here, you always took another firefighter with you, and that person would take notes. And Dustin happened to be that person that went in there with me. So he really kind of got to know all the nasty, dark, deep nooks and cranny of my story. And he went in there with a therapist, and they would do what they called was an influential background. And it literally started out with, when were you born? And it started in the upper left-hand corner of that big whiteboard wall. And they'd ask, were your parents married when you were born? Yes. Are your parents still married? No. When did they get divorced? Kindergarten, and then they'd start really, this huge map of your life just all of a sudden exploded all over this wall. And then the therapist would go back and he would start circling these big moments, like my sophomore year of high school, when my friend hung himself. That was one of the deals that got circled on the board. So there's I think that a lot of what we do, like what I read in the second mountain in that paragraph, some of those earliest, our traumas now really kind of go back to the earliest moments of our life.
All right, I see some comments about the resources. I did put the link for Dr. Glenn's website in the chat box. And then Cody has put his email up. This will be on our YouTube site. So if you want to reach out to him about other resources, that will be there. There's the information up now on suicide and then some of the websites that are involved with that. Anything else from the committee? One said, does medication need to be taken with therapy?
I wouldn't say that it needs to be taken with therapy, but if you're taking some sort of medication for a mental health related reason, you should be going to therapy. I would most certainly follow what your mental health provider, though, is suggesting that you do.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Cody. That was fantastic.
Oh,
Great way to end the conference.
Yeah, I've never done it virtually like this, so this is a little different. So I'm sorry if I was stumbling a little bit, but I would have much rather have seen you all sitting in person. So
Us as well. We're looking forward to next year.
yep. So all right, thanks. Everybody be happy and healthy and take care of yourselves and each other. So
thank you, Cody.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. So that'll do for 2021. Just some things to throw out there, what Cody eloquently alluded to. We hope that next year, in some capacity, we will have a in-person, but we're also looking at more than likely having a hybrid option. It's difficult for people to travel long distances, so we're hoping in the future, the one good thing maybe that came out of the pandemic is the virtual, but we're going to do hopefully some kind of hybrid next year, but it'll be same time next year, most likely. So we thank you all for attending. Reach out if you have any questions. Again, it takes about an hour for certificates of attendance to come out. Yeah, let us know if you need anything. But other than that, thank you, and we'll see you all next year.